Secret of the Conde Hermanos by Clarissa Bell. Chapter 11. Gwendolina, I see the souls of many of your loved ones have returned to visit you this year, Rogelio observed in wide-eyed wonder, as he came in through the French doors from the garden with a bag full of freshly picked lemons. He had come to the house that day to prepare Dr. Cordero's extensive collection of killims to be picked up for cleaning and repair, and Gwen had told him to help himself to the lemons. That hung heavily on several trees in the backyard. They are right on schedule, Meher. Today is All Souls' Day. And what souls, may I ask, are we referring to, hombre? Gwen asked with the usual bemused interest that she reserved for Rogelio's oft-times prescient revelations regarding the unseen world around them. Oh, just the ones hanging out in your eucalyptus tree, he said facetiously. I would say there are at least 50 here. You can't miss them. Come, mija. Let me show you. He finished in mock exasperation, leading her like a child by the hand to the garden, and then pointing about halfway up the tree in question. Following his finger with her gaze, she looked as hard as she could, but confessed that she saw nothing. What am I supposed to see? She asked in frustration. Souls, Gwendolina, they are here. Souls, Gwendolina, they are there, mi amor. Look harder. She scrunched her face, squinted her eyes, and willed to see them with all their might. But alas, it was of no use. All I see are dead leaves, Rogelio, nothing else, she said in self-defeat, feeling her powers to penetrate the spirit were, indeed, sadly lacking. Oh, but then you do see them, he said triumphantly. Remember, souls love to wear disguises, Gwendolina. Of course. How could Gwen forget, for hadn't Rogelio told her around this time last year that the souls of the Conde Hermanos would return to her in a disguise? And sure enough, hadn't she found her white kitten, Blaze, under the unusual circumstances, on the beach shortly thereafter? Truth is, they are sleeping right now, Rogelio confided. And as I have much work yet to do, let us return and eat a late lunch in the garden. By then they might be awake and much easier to see. They followed his sage advice and returned at 2 o'clock with a blanket to spread out in the grass, trailed by 2 curious cats, Bartholomew and Blaze, who always enjoyed a nap in the afternoon sun, and perchance a morsel of some delicacy to their liking. Today they would not be disappointed, for the ever-popular sardine sandwiches were on the menu, and the 4 of them soon settled down to an idyllic garden repast. As the early November sunlight cast its spell on the garden denizens, even the dried leaves in the eucalyptus tree could not. As the early November sunlight cast its spell upon the garden denizens, even the dried leaves in the eucalyptus trees could not help but stir amongst themselves and rustle in delight. They seemed one by one to loosen their grip and let go of the stem, as if preparing to fall gracefully on the ground. But at that point something odd happened, for they didn't flutter to the ground at all, but began to dance magically in the air and change their color from drab brown to tangerine. Then they filled the air and proceeded to create an ethereal spectacle of enchantment. It was then that Gwen realized she was at least seeing the souls that Rogelio insisted were there all along, and they were disguised as monarch butterflies. By this time Rogelio had opened the bottle of tinto that he had brought, and as they were raising their glasses in a toast, he said, "We must salute to all the departed souls who have come to spend the winter with you. They will leave you in the spring, Gwendolina. They will be called home. I wonder who they are, Rogelio, and why they've chosen me. Any thoughts, maestro?" she asked as she took a sip of her tinto, and then watched a group of monarchs on a nearby bottle-brush tree drinking nectar delicately. "Of course I know who they are, Gwendolina. They're your loved ones," Rogelio restated patiently. "But so many?" Gwen could feel her tiresome habit of always making sense of things interfering with the miraculous, as usual. "Gwendolina, mi vida, listen to me, por favor." Rogelio spoke gently, as if he realizing his words might sound strange to the uninitiated ear. Calmly, he continued. They might be many souls. It is possible. But they also might be just one or two very powerful souls who need many mariposas to convey their spirit. The thing of it is, you will know who it is. I'm sure you already do. Just think about it before you go to sleep at night. Maybe they will tell you in a dream, he offered encouragingly. As Rogelio could always be counted on for sound advice in matters such as these, Gwen took his words to heart. Bartholomew and Blaise slept on Gwen's bed with her that night. It was to them she voiced her concerns each morning regarding her inability to remember her dreams. Perhaps, she acknowledged, she was trying too hard and sabotaging her own best efforts. But try as she might, she seemed to pass the entire winter in a thoroughly dreamless state. She did, however, spend countless dreamlike hours with the monarchs in the garden and was privileged to observe firsthand their curious, ephemeral ways, which entailed everything from hanging about a great deal of time in a cluster resembling dead leaves, as they had done when she first met them, to playing capriciously in the filtered afternoon sunlight, and continued to use of the bottle brush tree for nectar. This charmingly sedate way of life did nothing to prepare her for the madness and mayhem of mating season, when things began both literally and figuratively to heat up. The monarchs, she learned, were extremely light-sensitive, and could tell by the warmth of the gradually lengthening days that it was time to come out of their winter diapause, a state of sexually arrested development necessitated by the winter die-off of their host plant milkweed. But as the spring approached and the milkweed matured and bloomed, so did the monarchs, and their desire to mate then became most urgent. She watched, at first utmost in alarm, as the male butterflies began to simply snatch females in midair, and then float with them to the ground. There, a seeming wrestling match ensued, in which the female would quite often get away. But when the male was successful, he would attach his abdomen to hers in a rather lengthy process, and then lift her quite arduously up into the air, carrying her out of sight into the highest limbs of the eucalyptus tree. Then the actual mating process began, and it would take the entire night to complete. The morning after, the pair would depart and head toward the nearest milkweed, there to lay eggs and die within a few weeks' time. Such is the inestimable power of spring. Gwen mused as one by one the monarchs left the garden to itself, as if they had never been there at all. But they had. I never found out who they were. Gwen lamented to Bartholomew one morning as he sprawled across the front page of the newspaper she had been attempting to read while having breakfast. Mew stared at her languidly, seemingly filled with ennui, and not the least bit of concern for her problems, when he suddenly shifted gears completely and began to act as if he had just caught a strong whiff of catnip. He leapt from the table, and from under it tailed Blaise, whom he had soon begun to lead on a merry chase throughout the house. She noted the comically hectic pitter-patter of tiny feet, growing louder, then softer, as they raced helter-skelter, hither and yon, and then it all abruptly came to an end with the sound of shattering glass. "What on earth?" Gwen said in horror, for indeed it had been the sound of an enormous crash. She raced down the hall, peering quickly into every room, looking for its source, and she found it in what had been once Blanquita's dance studio, where a large floor-length mirror, which had of late leaned against the wall, now lay face down on the floor. "Naughty cats!" she started to say, and then stopped herself, for although the damage was extensive and would require careful cleanup, it revealed something of great interest. Behind the mess and against the wall, secretly rested an exquisite framed print of what happened to be some celebration in ancient Rome. The scene was depicted all in marble, with pretty maidens in floral head wreaths playing pipes and tambourines, and little girls in the foreground strewing petals. She had never seen anything like it, and reading the fine print on the lower corner, she read, "Spring, 1984, Lawrence Alma Tadema. Oil on canvas, 70.5 by 31 5/8 inches. J. Paul Getty Museum, Malibu." Although she had yet to visit the museum, she knew it was located nearby, just up Pacific Coast Highway, and it made sense that Blanquita and Carlos, with their artistic sensibilities, would frequent there. As she carefully removed the frame from the wall, she remembered how the back of Petal's portrait had yielded much valuable information. She hoped the back of Spring would likewise provide something of significance. She was not disappointed, for there she saw, scrawled in Dr. Cordero's inimitable script and inscribed to Blanquita, a verse by T.S. Eliot. A verse which called into question the very essence of time and space, and went so far as to ask why it was necessary for anyone to live for 100 years, when the butterfly lived only a day, and essentially lived an eternity. It ended most ominously, giving what the future would hold for Carlos and Blanquita, by suggesting that all their days of love might be few, they should nevertheless let them be divine. And so, they were the returning souls who came to spend the winter with us, huh? I guess I suspected all along, but what I really needed was proof. Thank you for providing it, dear Mew, as usual, she said to Bartholomew, who by that time had regained his ineffable sense of ennui. He did manage, however, after opening his mouth very wide and luxurious yawn, to disclaim it with one small, customary sneeze. That evening, Gwen turned in early, and slept unusually soundly, with Bartholomew and Blaise on the bed. In the morning she was pleased to inform them that she had at last dreamt that night, and it had been of Carlos and Blanquita.